Okay, welcome to Right of Reply. Today you're joined by Professor Mozersky, and your hosts are Xavier and Tristan. Nick has been killed by Xavier and replaced.
Yeah, I just had to. So today we're joined by Josh Mozersky. He is a professor of philosophy at Queen's University, where he was formerly the Canada Research Chair in Metaphysics and the Philosophy of Science. He's the author of Time, Language in Ontology, The World from the B-Theoretic Perspective, and is published in Philosophical Studies, Synthèse, and the Oxford Handbook on Time, among other venues. His research spans metaphysics, philosophy of science, and philosophy of language, among being a goated prof. Mozersky, welcome to Right of Reply.
Oh my gosh, that's quite an introduction. Thank you both. I'm delighted to be here.
All right, first question. Josh, are we living in a simulation?
Oh, yeah. Sure. Let's start easy with a nice simple one. So I don't have a very particularly new take on the simulation argument, right? I think it's interesting and important epistemologically, and so before I answer what I think whether we are in a simulation or not, let me just say that even if we were, I think that fundamentally nothing really changes because we have the same problems, whether we are made up of information controlled by algorithms or atoms controlled by natural laws, right? One way or another, we can die. In the one case, we can be deleted. In the other, the algorithm, if it's programmed to run down after 80 simulated years, we're gone after an experience of 80 years. And since if I'm an algorithm, I know I can feel pain, then I suspect you guys can as well. So I don't want to cause pain in this simulator. So ethically, I think we have roughly the same concerns. I think that the idea but the reasoning behind it is sort of inductively interesting, right? It's inductively interesting in the sense that if there is at one point in human history, future history, enough computing power to realistically simulate human experience, to functionally duplicate a human mind so that it is conscious and has first-person perspective. If that's true, and it becomes eventually computationally trivial, in the same way that, our phones have more computing power than supercomputers when I was a student. So it says in your pocket, you'll be able to simulate 1 million digital beings, all conscious. Then I think there is a very strong argument to the conclusion that there's a very realistic possibility that there are more digital consciousness beings than non-digital, because our descendants will likely run simulations all the time. And so just statistically speaking, you are probably one of the digital beings, right? Unless, as the original argument goes, for some reason human beings just change radically in the next 100 years, hate simulations. We'll just not do that anymore, which seems unlikely. Or we destroy ourselves before that happens, which, there is the doomsday argument. I don't know if you've encountered that, to suggest that we are probably near the end, just on a priori Bayesian reasoning. I don't know if you guys have encountered that. It's due to a Canadian philosopher, John Leslie. So, given that it seems unlikely human psychology is going to change to the point we don't like simulations, given the chance it doesn't seem that computing power is going to radically slow down, there's a pretty decent argument to the effect that there will be, 1 million simulated realities for one base reality.
Why doesn't your Boltzmann brain argument work for simulated consciousness?
Oh, that's a good question. So let me get to that in one moment. I just want to say one last thing about the classical simulation argument. One of the things, though, that I do take from that argument that I think is I haven't really heard this one or seen this one discussed, though, right, is that if we are in a simulation, right, then there is effectively a God for us. There is a being who is effectively omniscient. He's relatively omniscient, omnipotent, right? There's nothing in this universe that whoever's running this sim can't do or can't know, right? So in a sense, this idea of relative omniscience, right? That for all intents and purposes, we have a God, right? Okay, so Yeah. So what's okay? So, and by the way, interrupt me at any time, guys. So connect that to Boltzmann brains, right? So, should I quickly run over the Boltzmann brain
Sure, yeah.
argument? Yeah. Okay. So the Boltzmann brain argument, in a nutshell, is that you start from the assumption that the universe is temporally infinite. Okay, there's no beginning in time and no end in time, and you add to that. This isn't part of the standard argument, but this, I think, has become part of the argument thanks to Michael Huemer, the University of Colorado. Right? You add to that the admitted fact amongst cosmologists that the entropy at the Big Bang has to be extraordinarily low. In other words, the Big Bang is an extremely improbable configuration of matter energy.
This is the Penrose calculation?
Yes.
Yeah.
Penrose calculation, and it's sometimes called the past hypothesis, that the reason why entropy is continually getting higher and higher and higher is because it was extraordinarily low at the Big Bang, and just as a matter of statistical reasoning, right, very, very low probability stuff will generally evolve into higher probability stuff, right? It's almost a definitional truth. Okay, so what Huemer points out, I think quite plausibly, is that if that's the first moment of time, right, and it has, an improbability that makes, tossing a nickel once a second for 1 trillion years and it landing on edge every single time is way more probable than the Big Bang, right? If that's the first moment of time just out of nothing, this is literally one of the most incredible explanations that science has ever proposed, right? Literally, out of nothing, you tossed 1 trillion dice, they all came out one.
Mm-hmm.
And we just accept this, right? And so his suggestion is, right, he says this explicitly, right? It'd be way more probable for the universe to spontaneously form as it was in 1950. Way more probable, like trillions upon trillions of times more probable. Okay, so Big Bang's really improbable. If time is infinite and the material contents of the universe are just randomly recombinating over that time, every now and then they're just going to find themselves going into a very, very low probable state like the Big Bang. So you would expect that to happen every now and then. Suddenly it becomes completely expected. Okay, so you combine this together and you say more likely time is infinite and the material contents of the world are just scattering about randomly for all time, but every now and then they just, by chance, come together, right? They're moving randomly. For some reason, randomness just gets them all moving together. They create a little Big Bang, explodes back out again, and you're just going infinitely cycling through time. Most of the time, you're at maximum randomness, just heat death. Nothing's happening for trillions of years. Every now and then you get a little fluctuation. Randomness forms an exact duplicate of your brain right now. Exactly the material configuration of your synapses, your neurons, just by chance. Just material content moving scattered in random directions comes together exactly in that configuration. Okay? Your access to the past and your access to the future is completely mediated by the state of your brain right now. You have memories right now. You have anticipations right now. That's how you know you're in time. That's how you know you're a creature with a past and a future. So if that were duplicated effectively instantaneously through a random fluctuation, for a second there would be a being in exactly your mental state right now. It's like, yeah, it's been a long day. I'm getting ready for dinner. I'm looking forward to the weekend. It's going to have all those states, but it's about to dissipate back out into the universe. That's a Boltzmann brain. Mm-hmm. And the idea is little fluctuations to create, say, one brain in the middle of the universe and then dissipate out again are much more frequent than what's required to create a whole galaxy or set of galaxies, right? Which will happen eventually, but much less frequently in infinite time. So most brains in the history of the universe are going to be momentary Boltzmann brains. Very rarely will there be the matter of the universe randomly coming together to create an Earth, a Sun, a Mars, a Venus, and other galaxies. And that'll happen once in a while, but but for every one of those, there'll be a trillion randomly just momentary Boltzmann brains. That's the Boltzmann brain argument. So the argument is, again, statistically, you are most likely to be a Boltzmann brain about to dissipate back into nature rather than an ordinary one.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, and, okay. So you've asked me, Xavier, if I'm, don't believe I'm a Boltzmann brain, which I've argued we shouldn't, why do I believe that the simulation hypothesis might be different? Okay. So the reason is, so my argument against believing we're a Boltzmann brain is because the idea is every second, every hour, every unit of time that you consider throughout, the infinite existence of the universe, there's an equal chance of any random configuration of matter happening as any other, right? So there's therefore no measure on this that says, you can give a certain probability to this kind happening versus that. It's just basically every configuration happens randomly.
Mm-hmm.
Every moment of time is in a sense a chance that a unlikely chain of events that produces an entire universe occurs as a Boltzmann brain, right?
Yeah.
So you just have to say, well, every moment of time, any random chance is possible, right? So then if you look at it from the point of view of infinity, you're going to have infinitely many of both, right? There are going to be infinitely many momentary Boltzmann brains, but also infinitely many long-lived human-like brains, because in infinite time, right, even if one thing happens a trillion times more often than the other, right, in infinite time, they both actually end up being the same.
Mm-hmm.
Infinite, the same cardinality, as it were, right? They're both, so if you took, the number line 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, or start with 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and go up to infinity, and then took out every ninth number. So you go 1, 2, 3, 4 on one end, and the other one you go 10, 20, 30, right? You're going to end up with the same number of numbers in the two lines. They're going to be the same infinity as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. So if one happens 10 times as often as the other, just by random chance, in infinite time, they're the same number. So it's actually only 50-50 your Boltzmann brain. And given that you have evidence that you aren't a Boltzmann brain, even if it's just a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
that tilts you in favor of believing you're not a Boltzmann brain.
It's almost Morian in a way, right? Because
Say more, please.
so what's this evidence that you're not a Boltzmann brain, right? It's it's our memories, right? It's all
Correct.
of our being ourselves, right? And so I wonder if there's a sort of parallel there where it's like, well, I have hands,
Yeah.
right? Well, that's the exact question that we're asking here. Do you have hands?
Yeah.
And it's like, well, I have this evidence
Yeah.
that I'm not a Boltzmann brain.
Yeah.
Well, but that's exactly what we're asking.
Yeah. So that's an excellent question. And for that, I'm going to appeal to another of Mike Humer's well-known principles, which is phenomenal conservatism,
A beautiful thing.
right? Which is that you seem to be a long-lived being, and that's some evidence that you are. And then the question is, does anything defeat that evidence? And the Boltzmann brain argument is supposed to be, well, this defeats it because there's a trillion Boltzmann
An
brains for
undercut
every
it,
one brain.
right?
But I say it's a coin toss. It's a 50-50, so it does nothing. It leaves the situation unchanged. So you go with that slight seeming advantage to being a long-lived brain. But that, of course, isn't like 100% proof. It just means that you have more reason to accept the common sense picture than that you don't, right? So that's my thinking on that one, right? It's like, well, you have some reason, right? Even if it's 1%, it goes 51 to 49, and that's how you should bet, something like that, right? Also, you would add into that all of this Boltzmann reasoning is based on scientific theory and evidence, probability theory, the second law of thermodynamics, what we know about physics. So you're taking all that on board, and you're saying, okay, well, there's some evidence too, right? That the world is kind of like that. And a world like that would, potentially produce long-lived beings as well, and, with memories and all this. So again, it's sort of, add it all up, I say slight edge that we're not a Boltzmann brain, okay? Now the thing about the simulation hypothesis is there is no assumption that there's an infinite number of iterations here, right? So if it's finite, right? So if there's only, let's say, the universe goes on long enough to create 1,000 times as many Boltzmann brains as ordinary brains, and that's it, stops.
Yeah.
Then it's 1,000 to 1 you're a Boltzmann brain, right? And so the simulation argument is done simply in terms of there will be many, many, many simulations. I think it does change if you put it in the context of it. So
if there's infinite time, then should we treat it the same?
Yeah. So in infinite time, will we then have infinite repetitions of one base reality spawning thousands and thousands and thousands of simulated realities, and then repeat, something like that, right?
Yeah.
And then you end up with, once again, right, potentially a situation in which you have an infinite number of each.
Exactly.
In infinite time, right? So you're back to the 50-50.
Interesting.
Yeah.
This sort of ties to another question on digital consciousness. So, firstly, do you think a digital consciousness is actually possible? And from that, do you think your rigid designator can pick out then digital Josh Mozersky?
Yeah. So with regard to the first question, right? My tendency on that is to say it has to be possible because, as far as I am aware, and certainly I personally have no solution to the mind-body problem, right? So I don't, I think the mind-body problem is probably underappreciated in the last century or so of philosophy, right? I think in the last 100 years, philosophers have been primarily of the mindset that it's all, like, physicalism is obvious. We're just atoms.
Yeah.
And whatever consciousness is, whatever experience is, whatever decision is, belief, it's just the operation or the organization or the function of material systems.
I think the Phil Papers survey was something above like 65% in favor of physicalism.
Yeah. Okay. So that now it seems to me, right, at the end of the day, that it's just a complete mystery why atoms moving in space-time would ever produce subjective experience.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm not saying it's impossible, but we just don't know why that would happen and how it would happen, because obviously sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes matter comes together to form a very complex system like the Amazon River Basin, which trillions upon trillions of molecules and maintains its water level and a temperature and da-da-da. We think there's no experience there, right? But the atoms are the same as ours and they're complex, and right? So given that, I think I have to say that it's possible that it's really something just like functional organization, and whatever implements it will also be conscious.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't have much confidence in that,
Yeah.
right? If somebody were, to remind me of John Searle's argument that consciousness is a biological product of material systems, much as, bile is a biological product of the gallbladder, and so if you can simulate a gallbladder all you want, you're not getting bile. You're getting digital representations of bile. And his point is you will get a representation of consciousness, but I think that's perfectly plausible. But I just think we don't know, because even then it's not clear how neurons produce consciousness, right? It's just like consciousness is experience is a different kind of thing from matter,
mm-hmm.
right? And so unlike bile, which is just chemicals itself from something else that is made out of matter, experience is not in any obvious way just more chemicals or more signals or something like that, right? So I think it on the one hand, therefore, I think it has to be possible
mm-hmm.
that a digital being could be conscious, but that's as mysterious, actually, as a biological being conscious, right? So I'll just, one more thing on that, and then maybe we can talk about rigid designation, right? Like, Like, if somebody told me, I don't actually believe this to be true, but if somebody told me that the way the human brain processes information is exactly the same way an LLM does,
Mm-hmm.
it does a tokenization of a semantic space and it turns it into a vector tensor analysis, and there you go.
Yeah.
That's how we produce thought. I would still be just as mystified by why there's any conscious experience attached to any of that.
Yeah.
Right? So I don't think it really helps to find out that we're digital to sort of say, well, that's what, now we have my body problem solved or something like that, right? So the original simulation argument takes that as a premise that substrate independence is a fact. If the right information processing is in neurons or silicon chips or gears and pulleys, it'll produce consciousness. It doesn't matter what it's made out of, right? And I just think we just don't know the answer to that question, which is part of why I'm less perplexed by the simulation argument. That's just a mystery to me.
Mm-hmm.
So rigid designation, it's interesting, right? I do think that rigid designation makes sense in a context in which you have an individual, an identifiable individual at some sense, or something that is a one, and you sort of say, like, I'm just designating that thing, right? So, what's my digital self? Is it? See, the thing that why I like this question, right? An algorithm, however complex that is, doesn't really seem to be that.
Mm-hmm.
An algorithm is more like a pattern that can be perfectly replicated somewhere else.
Yeah.
And it's the same pattern. There's no sense in which, so can I rigidly designate this instance of the pattern or something like that?
Mm-hmm.
I want this one. If you have a way of singling it out, like they occupy different positions in space and time or something like that, or this one was instantiated in this machine and this one in that machine, but the pattern itself is more like a form. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's a repeatable, and it's not, clear to me what you're rigidly designating in that sense. So when I think about what rigid designation is, which is, again, maybe to step back a bit and say what it is referring to something in a way that you can hold it constant while you change its properties, or as we talk about it in philosophy, imagine it in different worlds.
Yeah.
But it's still it, right? And this was Saul Kripke's intuition, that's what, beings like ourselves, or in general objects are. Objects are these things that can stay what they are even as their properties change. At least in many cases, maybe not all cases. Patterns aren't like that, right? A pattern is something that is exactly the same, can be in two places at once, right?
Yeah.
It can be in multiple places at once and still be exactly the same pattern, which objects can't be. So what are you designating? It have to be something like an instantiation of the pattern, or a path of the pattern versus a different path. There'd have to be some way. Could we just say, look, the one that's instantiated starting at this time and place?
Mm-hmm. It's interesting you say instantiation.
Yeah.
Because I've only just recently read Naming and Necessity, and
Yeah.
all the talk of rigid designators really seems to push me towards the thought of actual abstract objects, especially for identity, right? So
Okay.
if we ask why my rigid designator, Xavier, can pick me out in different possible worlds, despite everything changing, some people give the answer of the sperm and the egg is the common fact in between you.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not sure if that argument works, because we can imagine, possible worlds in which God snapped his fingers and his or her fingers and created me just spontaneously. Still seems like that's picking out Xavier.
Yeah.
We can imagine a possible world in which time, like Mike Humer, started in August 7th, 2006, right?
Yeah.
And so I already exist at the beginning of time.
Yeah.
We can imagine, well, is the Boltzmann brain you?
Yeah.
Right? And if it's not you, should we dissolve that worry for that?
Yeah.
So I wonder then if the talk of patterns maybe isn't the proper thing we should be focusing on, but
Yeah.
rather if, well, algorithms and digital reconstructions can actually instantiate things.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean those are fair intuitions actually. And I think that there's I would say that that Kripke's idea that there's a certain kind of, whatever seminal joining of DNA that occurs that's sort of what makes you or something like that was probably speculative as just a kind of, proposal for something that might be a sort of a natural necessity, right?
Is that Kripke's pineal gland?
Maybe, right? Because, when you think about us as sort of just biological organisms, right? And you think like, what is your essential nature? And it's something like those two strands of DNA or whatever coming together, like that was going to produce you one way or another. But it's not to me, it's not an obvious intuition, right? Because you could sort of imagine an alternative world where they come together and produce something that you wouldn't really want to identify with yourself. And you might want to, as you've just pointed out, identify a being that came into existence quite differently, really still being you. Or like if you found out that you were spontaneously created last August with the rest of the universe, you wouldn't think that you weren't designating yourself, right? So do you have something else that is sort of fundamental to you that you can designate and that stays constant as you consider all the possibilities around you? Yeah, that seems like an entirely reasonable proposal, actually.
Would you take the pea zombie version of you to be you?
Yeah, I don't know. You see, the thing about again, zombies for me are in some sense possible, right? But since I'm still so mystified by the existence of first-person experience, if the world is just material, right? And in fact, I think that there's some level at which this almost, just has to falsify materialism, right? Like, so,
that's conceivability,
right? So I definitely feel, more like identified or attached to my experiences, right? So if there's a body that's otherwise genetically this body without any experiences, I'm not too concerned about its well-being, right? But if there's these experiences in something that turns out not to be biological, I'm a little more interested in that. But but I'm also completely skeptical about the continuity of memory theory of identity.
Yeah.
I don't think that, or the continuity of experience theory, right? I don't think so because, for the famous counterexample, that can split. Right?
Yeah.
You can, the classic Star Trek beaming mishap, right? And two of you are recreated on the surface of the planet.
Would you step into the machine?
Yeah, see, I'm inclined not to.
What's your willingness to pay to step in?
At this point, it depends how old I am. If I'm coming up to the end.
Yeah.
Let's say I give you $1 million and you could donate that to people to produce a lot of welfare too. Are you still not choosing to step in?
Not until the last second.
Wow.
Then I'll go. Then I'll wait. Right. And my reason for that is that
T20.
My reason for that is simply that again, this is just my bafflement with the relationship between experience and the physical body. So if you like, when I tell a story to myself about what say tomorrow from now till tomorrow afternoon is going to be like, and I imagine we finish this up. And then, I go home and I have dinner and I talk and then I go to bed and I wake up the next morning and I see my bedroom and I go downstairs, see my kitchen and, all that. Okay, it makes perfect sense to me. I know exactly how that's going to feel, how it's going to look. I know how that's going to track with the rest of my experiences. If I imagine that tonight I go to bed and a mad scientist grabs my body and creates 1,000 copies and then lets them all wake up the next morning, I have no idea what my next experience is after I go to bed. I don't know, do I experience this house, that house, that house, that house? Where does my subjective train of experience go? And David Lewis, answers it's just like identity is one many. You can end up today, you today are one person, you can be 1,000 people tomorrow. They're all you, you're all them. Identity is not a one-one relationship. It can be a many-many relationship, a one-many relationship, a many-one. But from when I reflect on experience, I don't know what happened. I go to bed, 1,000 of me are created. And then the bodies are put in 1,000 different beds. Sorry. Does the body that's put in the bed that I went to sleep in, the house that I currently live in, is that my next experience? Or is it the one who's, put over, in a bed in a different city? Like, what happens to my train of experience the next morning?
How does I'm sure you recently saw the simulation of a fruit fly's brain. Did you see that? Yeah. How does that inform your bafflement over consciousness?
I haven't given it enough thought to have any more or less bafflement. Do you have a reaction based on what I'm saying?
For me, I kind of see a continuum of consciousness from bacteria to Homo sapiens. And especially if you think about like hominins over time, unfortunately most are extinct, but
sure.
To me it seems like a very nice, easy path from bacteria just reacting to various environmental stimuli to human beings. And so for me, I'm not that mystified by consciousness, even though I acknowledge that it's maybe the thing we know the least about.
I think this sort of points to a gap between physicalists and like more full of mind inclined people.
Sure.
Where a lot of people I find have the sort of illusionist pre-theoretic conception, right?
Yeah.
Where whatever phenomenal experience actually is, it's literally just the stimuli being sent to your brain. And often I'm not quite sure where to go dialectically if somebody accepts that, right? Because they just have an answer for everything. Well, no, it's just the stimulation in your brain.
Yeah. I mean, so that's a fair point. So in response to what you said, Tristan, right? So it's really reasonable what you said, right? Like there is certainly a continuum of behavioral complexity, sensitivity to the environment, adaptability, what kinds of behavior are available to things as you get up the chain, as it were, right? But part of the question is your suggestion that the bacteria have like tiny little consciousness? They're just a little bit subjective, right? They have a little bit of perspective on the world. And then the slightly more complex organisms, an algae or whatever, fungi that carpet a forest floor, have a little bit more consciousness and like actually kind of like see the world from a point of view or something like that, until you get to us where it's like a really unified subjective first person perspective.
Well, in the last few million years, it seems to me that, okay, so let's say you start with chimpanzees, right? And maybe you'd say they're not conscious, or maybe you'd say they're marginally conscious, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
And then some point in the chain of hominin evolution, you get Homo sapiens.
Right.
So where in between is, to me, it seems weird to just say there's a light switch with Homo sapiens, or no, actually, it's a light switch with Neanderthals, but not before. Or it's with Homo erectus or something like that. You know what I mean? Like there's,
I agree with that.
It seems like a progression that, if unfortunately they're all extinct, but if you had them here with us, you could study their brains and you could see each iteration.
Sure.
And it would not be that.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, actually, right? And I don't, I don't see any reason not to see a chimpanzee or a dog or a cat as conscious, right? As having feeling and experience and perspective. They can't think like we can, right? That is a bit of a switch, right? I mean, maybe other hominids, right? But there is, for me, this is probably very deeply connected to the existence of language in Homo sapiens, right? Our ability to use symbolic structures to abstract, right, rather than just respond, right, but to sort of form abstract concepts that go beyond anything we have or are currently experiencing, right? But that is different from sort of just a kind of awareness of the world and being able to feel things, and that's probably common amongst mammals and some others as well, right? So I agree with you. There's a chain of complexity, and while I suspect that consciousness is probably pretty full blown in a chimpanzee, right, and even a dog, reasoning and abstraction and that kind of stuff is probably extremely limited, right? There's like such a chasm between what humans can do with symbols and what non-symbol using creatures can, that I think it's almost a difference of kind. But I'm still mystified, if even with your story, which I agree with, why is there any first-person perspective on the universe? Why is there any subjectivity? Why isn't it just a bunch of matter moving around, just in more and more complex ways? Like, why does differential responsiveness to the environment, say, that animals have that plants don't, also come with this, like, perspective? Like, I see that, I'm in a room, right? And I'm not just moving. I can think about it and I can experience it, and
there's content to it.
There's content, right? I hear your words and I interpret them. I mean, like, how is matter pulling all of that off? I mean, I understand how it can do it computationally in a certain sense, right? Like, there are algorithms and circuits can implement those, but a computer can do that, and I don't see my computer as an experiencer, as a subject, right?
Well, I guess it just seems adaptive to be able to pattern recognize. Like, that's the mechanism for me. Like, well, why is this the case? Because it was adaptive for
it must have been
sapiens.
It must have been, but I'm still mystified as to how it arose from material interactions. Still seems very confusing to me, right? There is a sense, like, so to go now to your question and connect it up with that, your question, Xavier, right? Like, what do you say to a physicalist who just digs in and says, no, there's just the signals, there's just the neurons, there's just the chemicals transmitting, and that's it. Like, we just have to find how those things interact, and we'll have all the answers to the problem of the mind, or something like that, right? Like, what do you say to that person if they just don't see this as a perplexing thing? Yeah. Like, I don't understand. Like,
there is no hard problem.
Like, what's the problem? We have all these neurons. It was adaptive to develop some really complex ability to respond to your environment. It's probably adaptive to form second order reflection on your own self so that you can plan your future. And it's right.
Plan the buffalo hunt.
Right. And all that kind of stuff. Right. And somebody just says, well, that's not a mystery. That's very biologically useful, right, to do that. And there's obviously something to be said for that explanation, but there's obviously also something very biologically useful about just being a non-experiencing mushroom fungal system at the floor of a forest. That's also very adaptive, right? So the question is, how did matter pull off the trick? It's adaptive and it's useful, right? But it's not like you just had one chemical and then a chemical or one physical organism, physical structure, chemical reaction within it, and then the result is a chemical. You're talking about the result being perspective, experience, consciousness, awareness, not just responsiveness. Like, you get hit, you move away.
Maybe it's because we're just such a social species. So obviously, like, there's lots of social species, a lot of herd animals, right?
Yeah.
And then a lot of primates are really social too. But we just super adapted into that trait of empathy as something that's super, super useful for us in terms of spreading your genes. And so maybe a byproduct of that optimization towards empathy is just that you get consciousness for yourself.
Yeah. But the question is, what is that byproduct process? Like, how does that work? Like, what's the story that you tell about this, right? Like without just at some level saying something like, when you reach this level of complexity, then you get consciousness.
Well, why don't we just... Okay, so I agree. I mean, the brain is the most complex thing that we know of, right?
Yeah.
So it's probably going to be the last thing that we fully understand.
Agreed.
And I agree that we don't fully understand it yet. But I guess for me, I'm just thinking in probability terms, like it's like 99% that it will eventually just be explained.
Yeah, and so to go to Xavier's question, let's push back on that and say, how do you arrive at 99?
Mm-hmm.
Why aren't you 50-50?
Yeah, I guess it's just the path dependence that I was mentioning earlier with evolution. But I'm just curious what what would be your probability distribution on that? Like, what would you assign to it being material? Like, what would you assign to something else?
Panpsychism.
Yeah, okay, so I actually don't have a good answer to that question, okay, right? Because I just am not sure how to assess it, right? So because here's another way maybe I could put it to try to express why I think it's a very puzzling phenomenon, right? Like I don't know how to translate from the vocabulary of position, momentum, velocity, and energy, say, to the vocabulary of goal, desire, intention, suffering. I don't know how to translate from that. I don't know how to say, like, you will get suffering when the molecules do this.
Mm-hmm.
And only when they do this.
Okay, I'm too stubborn. I
don't know
need the
how
probability, though.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know how to translate from those, right? So I guess my probability distribution is to be defined. I don't have a well-defined probability distribution, because I'll give you a couple of metaphors for this to see if this helps you see why I find this kind of. I remember these are two in the old days when I saw these when I was a kid, like cartoon panels in newspapers, right? So like single panel cartoons, like Far Side or that kind of thing, right?
Rhymes with orange.
And one of them was a couple of they're both scientists standing at a blackboard scribbling all kinds of numbers and equations, right? And so one of them had just a short equation, then an equal sign, and then a dollar sign on the other side. And the caption was something like, "Scientists finally proved that time does equal money." Right? And to me, right, the joke of that is you can't prove that with math formulas.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Because what you mean by time equals money has to do with effort, intentionality, economics. You're never going to prove that from the equations of physics, right? And then another one was a whole set of equations, and then on the other side was the answer. But somewhere in the middle, the scientist wrote, "Here's where the miracle happens." And the other scientist points and says, "I think you need to work out that part a little bit more." Right? So it's a little bit like, again, if you found out that your brain was actually not made out of neurons, you actually had an actual LLM in there. You're an experiment.
Mm-hmm.
There's a computer chip in there.
Mm-hmm.
Would you say, now I know why I'm conscious? Now I get it.
If someone fully explained how all the processes work.
Yeah, well, yeah, you can go read, Anthropic or whatever. They put out these white papers, and it's basically calculating a bunch of vectors.
Yeah.
And then they transform those vectors into a most probable next vector, and then repeat. And it's like, that's how it generates coherent text beautifully.
Yeah,
obviously.
I think right now, I don't think people understand LLMs fully either. But if you were to say to me, it's fully explained, like whether it's a brain or an LLM, I would be content. After you fully explain it, I fully understand it, which might take a long time.
But would you feel like you understood why there was consciousness there? If you found out that you weren't neurons, but you were an LLM, or the other way around? You're like, now I get why there's consciousness in this case, but not in that case.
Well, it almost feels like definitionally it would. Like if you're saying that it can all be explained materially, then why wouldn't I understand it?
Oh, okay. But it depends what you mean by all explained. I'm just saying it explains the production of the next line of text, right? So you can explain how fully. I mean, I can't, but I've read a few papers on this, and it makes general sense to me how they produce the next word, and then the next word, and then the next word, by basically giving every word its own vector, and then a sentence becomes a combination vector, and then they try to calculate most likely next vector, which has one more word in it, and then repeat. Okay. I mean, generally that makes sense to me. It's a very fascinating piece of math, right? Like that's fantastically interesting, and the results are crazy good. But if somebody said, so you can totally see why ChatGPT is conscious, right? If that's what it's doing. I don't feel I understand that.
Yeah.
That doesn't make intuitive sense to me. I'm not saying it's impossible, but I don't understand how consciousness comes from that. And so that's how I feel about like if somebody mapped your or my brain the way they did the fruit flies. I wouldn't look at that and read a paper on how describing a structure and go, I totally get why that's conscious, but those speakers aren't or whatever, you know what I mean? I just feel like I still wouldn't understand it, but that doesn't mean it's not what's going on.
What do you think would have to be the case for you to understand it?
Yeah, I think I would, it's a funny question, a great question actually, because, so often, right, scientific explanations do kind of just bottom out and that's just the way it is. Yeah. Just the universe works that way.
A lot of physics is really unintuitive.
Yeah. Right. And and interestingly, like Isaac, to take an example, Isaac Newton himself thought his own theories made no sense. And he wrote this to a letter to a friend of his. So for example, his theory of gravitation was based on the idea that two masses attract each other proportionate to how much mass there is and inversely proportional to the square of how far apart they are, right? So you double how far apart they are, the strength goes down to a quarter of what it was before. But if you double the mass, the strength doubles, right? And he was mystified as to like how the Earth and the Moon could be doing this to each other. Is he's like, are they like shooting little particles at each other and grabbing? Like, how does this force pull them together through empty space? And he had no answer for it. And so he just said, but the math works. I don't understand how this is working. And most physicists just said, yeah, we don't really get it, but that's just the way the world works.
Yeah.
Right? And so at the end of the day, it's true, right? There's something about explanation that is partly like, where are you willing to stop and say, yeah, I'm happy, like you were, and I'm just willing to say, I'm not willing to stop there and say, I still don't actually quite get it, right? Who knows how to really answer that question in some general way, right? But yeah, you're right. At the end of the day, right, even the most fundamental physics explanations of things end up really just kind of being, okay, I guess that's just the way it works. And what makes a scientific theory really kind of grab us are things like its ability to unify different things under one umbrella, right? Or make previously mysterious things suddenly simple mathematical consequences of your theory. And then all of a sudden we feel like we get it.
Yeah.
But for Newton, there's just this conceptual leap. Like, how do two bodies through empty space grab each other?
Are there other hard problems out there?
Yeah. I mean, I suppose, again, you'd have to think about what really makes an explanation satisfactory. Because, I mean, let's say so one of the things that you might think is, well, why is it unsatisfactory for two bodies through empty space not exchanging anything to just grab each other through something called a force, right? Newton thought the idea of a force was kind of mysterious. How does it work? What's it doing? What's the Earth doing to the moon to keep it there, right? Force. Mass just has this force, right? And that's what he expressed in a letter he wrote. He said, that's weird. That doesn't make much sense. If there were actually like gears touching each other, pushing and pulling each other, that would make sense. So, yeah, there could be like the hard problem of gravity.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, I mean, you could say then, okay, you could push this back on me and say, well, Josh, you're just not willing to stop asking, but why? When to us over there on this side of the table, it's, neurons do this and you get consciousness and that's just the way it is. But it still strikes me as like orthogonal vocabularies. One vocabulary is cause, effect, push, pull, position, momentum. The other vocabulary is goal, desire, suffering, pain. And I'm not sure why, this is the zombie problem, right? Like, why aren't we just zombies? Why aren't we just physical machines that react to our environment but don't have the experience? And I agree with you. For the majority of philosophers, that's not a compelling challenge. Like David Chalmers' challenge, which is roughly that. What explains the fact that we aren't zombies? For the 65% of philosophers, that's just not interesting. I actually think it's interesting.
Yeah.
I'm challenged by that. I think that I can imagine purely mechanical machines that I would have no inclination to call conscious being very adaptable and able to interact with their environment at a level comparable to a human being. And so therefore I do wonder what the difference is between that kind of material gathering and this kind.
I guess I just have this heuristic of having an aversion to human-centric theories of the universe. So like, like for a long time, especially in Europe, but I'm sure in lots of cultures, like especially because of the Catholic Church, there's just such an emphasis on humans being categorically different than anything else. And and theories like heliocentrism and evolution, where a lot of that was just breaking against that inclination to have us at the top as like very different.
Correct.
The universe revolves around us. We're categorically different. And so with this, it's like my brain just goes to, we're just like all the other animals. Like, and the only problem is that there is this sharp cutoff. I do acknowledge there's this sharp cutoff between our nearest relative and what we are today. But I just think that if all of our brothers and sisters who went extinct were alive today and they were walking around, it wouldn't be so mystifying.
Yeah, I would still be mystified because I still find it kind of mystifying that dogs and chimpanzees are conscious. Like, I actually think that's still a bit mystifying. And I agree with you that we shouldn't be unduly human-centric and anthropocentric, right? However, right, I will go back to, there is one way in which we clearly stand on, that's language. Not communication. Other animals communicate, but they don't use language. And that is a pretty sharp line. Although, again, others like Daniel Dennett think it's not a sharp line. It's a continuum from bacteria to speaking.
It is. I'm sure like Homo erectus had some weird kind of language that they were using, but yeah. Anyways, I want to ask you a question though about physics actually. So if we look at physics like circa 2025, is true atheism really viable? So like for me, I see a lot of the leading contenders like being like string theory or world's quantum mechanics, and I think to a lot of people this actually looks like a kind of theology because it's so complex and so confusing to the average person. Whereas like theology has a kind of simplicity. It's like, God created the world. So where do you kind of stand on that debate? Do you think the universe is just going to be kind of unintelligible and absurd, or?
I take that possibility very seriously, right? Because so you and I are on the same page in the sense that I do think that we are biological products of evolution through natural selection. And so what that means is our cognitive system, our nervous system, and cognition is almost certainly an evolved organ system with, like every other one, scope and limits. So there's almost certainly going to be just limits to what is comprehensible to human beings, right? We just don't have infinite capacity. And unless, we got lucky enough that, we hit on the foundation, we can understand the foundational principles, and everything is a rather straightforward reiteration of that, then the only limitation would be time, right? And energy. We just don't have enough to calculate it, but it's fundamentally available to us. But time, limitations of time and energy are real limitations. So I take it seriously that we might just not be able to understand the universe, and in particular the parts of the universe that we are when we reflect on ourselves, right? Like, we're using cognition to understand itself. And so how is that actually going to, succeed without blind spots that you can never eliminate because, you just keep repeating them.
So are you a kind of a no-stick of a sort, where you think that the history of creation will just always be hidden from us?
I sort of view it this way, right? I think that, I'm very tempted by the infinite universe hypothesis, that it's just cycling infinitely, no beginning, no end, right? And in that sense, part of the problem loses its strength because you're not trying to figure out why it started, right? Like the Big Bang always just poses this weird instinct to kind of go out of nothing. Especially when it's a very improbable state. So if you have an eternal universe, right? One of the questions becomes, could that thing exist without some deeper ground for its existence? Could the universe just be this spatiotemporal thing with matter and energy in it that just goes on forever, or does that require a deeper explanation? Right? And so I think that one possibility is, look, the universe had to exist some way or another, even if one of those ways was nothing. So if it's just going to exist in some way or another, one of those ways could be space, time, matter, energy, infinitely cycling. Why not? And if you could have some way to make that a little more compelling, then just why not, right? Something like, by chance this wouldn't be that surprising or something like that, then I think you have a pretty strong argument. But on the other hand, if you could come up with an argument for, you would need something to ground this being. You would need something like a ground of being. You can't just have being for infinite time, right? Something must ground it, which is one argument for theism. One argument for theism is God isn't a being. God is a ground of being that allows beings to be, or something like that. And so you can have a ground of being and then being sort of resting on top of that, and that's a kind of complete story. Another story, though, that I find also compelling is just the universe exists infinitely. There's no cause for it to begin or end. It just is what it is. And what we see is really at base driven by sort of randomness.
See,
and that's kind of compelling to me as well. But that doesn't mean, for example, that we've just now explained why consciousness is in that universe. It doesn't mean that we've got now some simple answer to all the tough problems of science or something like that. But this question of, do you need something else?
Right.
I can see an argument for that, but I can also see an argument for, no, it had to be some way.
So, two questions from that.
Yeah.
The first, why should we think that time is infinite in any direction? Let's just start with the future, right? Because it doesn't seem inconceivable that, time is just another thing that is part of the universe, physical, constantly changing, right?
Yeah.
Why should we think that it goes on forever, right? Is it like a physical thing? What kind of thing is time?
Yeah.
And then following from that, what is randomness? Is it a real property? Is it the absence of property?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I actually think you can come up with a coherent account of finite time, right? So I guess this is a point of disagreement between me and Professor Humer. But it depends. I mean, so one way you could do this is you could have a kind of, Newton and Leibniz debated this, through an intermediary, Clarke, right? They wrote letters. Newton would dictate to Clarke. Clarke would write back to Leibniz. And Leibniz had a position that was also Descartes' position, right? Which is that time, space as well, but time is just a relation between events, right? So time doesn't have any ontological standing.
Yeah.
right? And space doesn't either. Space is just relations between bodies. Time is relations between events. So if you have distinct events, you have time. They're either related by simultaneity or earlier or later, right? But the time itself is just like the body, the events, right? Now, on that view, right, which I think is coherent, it makes sense to suppose time is finite, because let's say you just had a universe that consisted of two events.
Yeah.
Right. So one at one time, one at another time. There's nothing earlier than one of them, and there's nothing later than the other one. All they have is their relationship between each other. So in that sense, time exists just as the set of events related, and that's finite, right? So I think that's a coherent view, right? It is actually a coherent view, and so one possibility is that so you could imagine our universe as like geometrically as sort of like a football. So it starts at the Big Bang, and then it gets bigger in the middle, and let's say it comes back together and there's another point at the end, right? So imagine that, right? You say, here's a Big Bang, it spreads out for a while, and then it shrinks back down to that point there, and there are no further events there and no further events there. So you're Leibniz, and you say, so there's nothing defined to the right of this event or to the left of that one, and that's the self-contained universe, finite time. I do think that's coherent. The question is why those points, or at least the one that we call a Big Bang, would be in such a highly improbable state, though. That's like it's just an odd combination, but I don't think it's incoherent. I do think you can make sense of the idea that time is finite. If you have a kind of relational view, right? Now I think, well, what if it's not relations? It is its own physical substance. Couldn't it be a finite physical substance? I suppose it could be, but that's a little more arbitrary.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, well, like Professor Hume argues, like, so what? You just like reach this point and then just like things just stop? Why would they just stop? Right? And your answer is because that's where time stops. It sounds a little bit arbitrary. And I was just like, well, why would it just stop there? But yeah, I actually think it's coherent. I think it's coherent. It's just not the model that makes the most sense of things to me.
What's your probability distribution on that?
Yeah, my probability distribution on that is to be defined. But I guess what I like about the other one is it makes the highly improbable Big Bang expected.
Yeah.
Of course, that's going to happen in infinite time.
So you have two bets. On the one hand is a coin.
Yeah.
Heads 50%, tails 50%.
Yeah.
And in the other,
narrow me down.
On the other, the relational view is true. You get $1 million. If it lands heads. Which view are you taking? Which bet are you taking?
I'm probably gonna take the coin.
Ooh.
Yeah. So I think the relational view is coherent, right? But I don't think it's quite as explanatory myself.
Interesting.
So but I do think it's a possibility. Yeah. But I tend to think that Newton's arguments were a little stronger. Yeah.
So under 50%, okay.
I think so, yeah.
All right, so we'd like to move on to a bit of a discussion about more philosophy in general. So
sure.
I have a question about the pandemic, actually.
Okay.
So
is there another one coming?
Are
you planning another one?
In the pandemic, we're going through.
We're anti-EA.
In my opinion, like literally trolley problem after trolley problem with various decisions over like vaccine mandates, whether to reopen, mask mandates. But it's not like Trump ever asked some of the leading philosophers, or Biden for that matter, to like advise them on what to do. Like we didn't get Peter Singer, we got like Fauci. So I'm just wondering, like, shouldn't philosophers have a lot to say in these scenarios, or even with the recent war in Iran? Like, I guess so. My question is, there's like a big event, another big war, another big pandemic. Do you think philosophers should be consulted more in governments, and why aren't they? I mean, they've been penning articles about the trolley problem for like 60 years now. So is the problem that they don't have good answers, or that people don't want to stomach the answers?
It's probably a combination of that, actually. It's a good question. I don't have much to say on that I've considered, right? But so there's no question, I think, that philosophy outside of the discipline has a reputation as whatever, useless, what have you. Rich Feynman famously said, philosophy of science is as useful to science as ornithology is to birds. Or, Neil deGrasse Tyson said, sound of one hand clapping, what's the point, that kind of stuff. And so I think that's part of it. I think part of it is that, even if they had been asked, people may have just ignored them. On the other hand, there are compelling counterexamples like a Peter Singer, who's had a very big public impact and people take seriously, pro and con. Daniel Dennett has had a big, has been able to sell philosophy as of deep interest. But I'm not sure, but there's two problems, at least, other than the reputation one, which is that philosophers generally don't reach consensus on really controversial issues, right? Like even 65% physicalism, right? That's much lower than, say, the physicists would be on, relativity theory over Newtonian theory or something like that, or the mathematicians on 1 + 1 is 2, right? Like there it's like 99.9%. Like, so we tend to just have a lot of disagreement because, again, it's probably sociological reasons for that, but also just, I think Bertrand Russell made a good point when he said philosophy is really more about opening up questions than providing answers. It's expanding your way to think about things rather than narrowing it down to answers. Okay. And then, of course, when it comes to advising the real world, right, I don't think philosophers have a solution to the fact that people have different utility functions, different values, right? Different, risk tolerances, and et cetera, right? So, what do you, can you really solve a problem where somebody says, whatever, this thing has a 1 in 1,000 chance of causing some catastrophe. And somebody says, great, it's safe. And another person goes, that's way too risky. Is there really an answer to that question in terms of what is an appropriate amount of risk tolerance? Right?
It depends on your meta-ethical views.
Yeah, so right, and so what are you going to? So one meta-ethical view I'm drawn to, of course, is anarchism, right? So let the individual decide, but that, of course, always comes into conflict with population ethics, right? And what if the individual is going to cause an incredible risk to the rest of the population? My general sort of reading of history on this is that, other than some really extreme outliers, people, when it comes to health and death and disease and that kind of stuff, tend to be pretty cautious. They tend to be pretty cautious and want to do what's sort of safe and reasonable. But I do think that one of the things we've learned in the last 6 years is that you can get a lot of pushback if you go heavy-handed on telling people what to do with their, own health and their bodies. Like you can make things worse by pushing even the right thing very, very, in a very authoritarian manner. So we have to be very careful about that. But there's, partly there's just empirical things in play here. People's psychology, moods, different cultures, different realities that I'm not sure philosophers are in a great position to contribute to, because it's not an empirical discipline. It's a conceptual discipline, right? So we can give people tools to think through problems, but it's very, very hard to go back to your question, what do you say to somebody who just digs in their heels? right? And as you know, like you're bringing up questions that have to do a lot with decision theory, right? So you probably know this, right? Like if your priors are either 0 or 1, you don't have any chance of Bayesian updating.
Yeah.
Did you know this? Did you know, like if you put in a prior, if you have a prior of 0, right, then your posterior is 0, no matter what the evidence. And if your prior is 1, your posterior is 1, no matter what the evidence. And so in fact, if you follow Bayes' rule and you assign a probability of 1 or 0, the rational thing to do is to dig in your heels and never change your mind. The formula entails that.
Yeah.
It's just a very simple thing. Like you could just sketch out the formula and put a prior of 0 in one case and put a prior of 1 in the other, and you'll see.
Yeah.
0 goes to 0, 1 goes to 1. And so in a certain sense, somebody who's 100% convinced or 0 shouldn't change their mind.
Yeah.
Right? So this is a kind of interesting paradox.
And
right?
you can choose any prior you want.
Right, especially if you are a subjectivist
One
about
on
this.
everything.
If you're a subjectivist about this and say, you know, yeah, your priors are your business. Right? Somebody who says, you know, actually I believe in God and it's 100% for me. Bayes' theorem says it's 100% for you, even if you take away the curtain and show there's the guy pulling the buttons that says, this is your God speaking. It's like you see him. If you started at 100%, you should still believe. That's what the formula tells you. So that, you know, so there's, and then of course, what can you do to people who just have a psychology that they don't want to listen?
That's interesting. So building on that, what do you think is the most underrated tool that you've learned as a philosopher for practical reasoning?
For practical reasoning?
So what should the average person like include in their rationality toolbox from the philosopher's mind? Yeah,
so one of them for sure is what I just mentioned, which is try to avoid 0 and 1. Okay, so like my most sort of basic advice is 0 and 1 is for math. And everything else you should be 99.9. You can put a lot of 9s in there after the decimal point, but don't go to 1.
And repeating.
And you can go to a lot of 0s after the decimal point, but there's got to be a 1 in there at some point. So that's actually, and I find that fairly practical. So because that promotes open-mindedness, a willingness to listen. And these are very, very useful things for navigating through a society where people have very different psychologies, right? So I would say, reason inductively as much as possible, right? But do it rationally, but try to avoid 0s and 1s, because then your rationality says never stop looking for evidence. No point, right? And generally, I think that's what, so the philosopher Charles Sanders Peirce says, his number one rule is do not ever block the path of inquiry.
Yeah.
And I think that's great practical advice. The other thing is, I'll tell you this, though, where I find deductive logic incredibly useful, the all or nothing reasoning of math and deductive logic, right? Because deductive logic is very strict, right? If you keep in mind, like, just what does this actually entail when you're believing something or considering something? What does this really logically, deductively entail? And you find out, in many cases, not very much, right? It doesn't act like logically, it just, doesn't actually entail that much. And it's not relevant to that many things, right? That also is, I find, very practical, because then it just makes you think, okay, so when somebody's saying something to you and they're trying to convince you of something, right? I find that there's often, when you just break it down logically, there's a lot of non sequiturs in there. A lot of points, if you just stopped and said, what's the relevance of that?
Yeah.
You'd stop them in their tracks. You'd be like, yeah, you're right, actually, that doesn't seem all that relevant, right? So I actually find sort of formal reasoning, whether it's Bayesian, whether it's deductive, getting used to putting my thoughts in that format and going, what really follows from this? And asking that really quite rigorously. I find that very practical. It really is a way to, it calms you down.
Mm-hmm.
It makes you less emotional, right? You don't go to the extremes as much because you get more comfortable staying in the middle. That's how I find it. So I find that pretty practical at both a personal and an interactional level.
It's Aristotelian in a way.
Yeah, well, you got to steal from the best.
Oh, who's the philosophy goat?
Oh, that's a tough one for me.
Why is it Frege?
That's a tough one for me. I'm such a buffet philosopher. Like, I just read and take what I like and discard what I don't like. And so to me though, it's definitely the usual suspects. Okay, it's definitely the usual suspects. Like, when I think of it, yes, I think of Frege is one of my favorites, and I'm a huge fan of Leibniz. The early modern rationalists, I love. I love Descartes and Leibniz in particular. Those guys, Spinoza, though, if the rationalists just really are cool to me. So therefore, I'm also drawn to Plato. Frege's motto was, every good philosopher is half a mathematician, and every good mathematician's half a philosopher. Mm-hmm. And it sort of joins up with what I was saying before, which is I just try to put things as sort of formally as I can and say, okay, like, abstract from the content here. What really follows, right? And then you become less emotionally attached to things. You become you get a little more stoic. I know Stoicism's having its day for many years now, and it's great that it is. But that's part of what, how I read the Stoics, right? Which is, detach a little bit through logic or rationality. So you apply your faculty of reason. In a certain sense, you'll see you become one being amongst many, and your life is a little less significant. You get a little less worried, a little less attached.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. All of that, I think, follows from taking, what Quine called the logical point of view.
Yeah, that's a very analytic perspective on it.
Correct.
And,
logocentric, logophilic. Yes.
You mentioned the buffet. You read what you want.
Yeah.
Take what you can. So, on your website on Queens, it mentions that you're working on a project titled Analytic First Continental Philosophy.
Yeah.
What's that about?
That's out of date now, unfortunately. That's just kind of that's just fallen into the to be done later box, because I've just picked up a whole bunch of other projects in the meantime. But I was writing at the time that page was made, I was starting just to jot down my thoughts, trying to figure out what's going on here, right? Because it's I was still a student when those wars were pretty hot. They're not that hot anymore, the continental versus analytic thing. But I am kind of interested in so I have this take on philosophy, which you guys have probably heard me say if you've been in my classroom, right? Which is, nothing, I didn't create this or discover this, right? It's been said for thousands of years, right? But the Western tradition in philosophy is the attempt to respond to puzzles, paradoxes, mysteries, confusions through the maximum application of the faculty of reason. Right, it's like we want the reasoned response to puzzles, paradoxes, confusion, right? As opposed to, just going to tradition or relying on revelation or religion or something like that. Although obviously there can be rational religious approaches, right? So or mystical experiences or whatever, right? The Western tradition, at least, and not necessarily only that one, is we're going to reason the problem to the ground.
Yeah.
And, obviously, there's there's an interesting thing. So you go back to Frege, and Frege gave us the modern sort of symbolic notation for deductive logic. And Russell discovered this and says, well, I'm going to apply this to empiricism, right? So I'm basically going to say, look, what we know is that we have experiences. That's where all our knowledge comes from. But we can use this notation to sort of clarify what's going on here. And and Wittgenstein, who studied with Russell, thought this was just lunacy.
Yeah.
I say that's not what the point is. The point is to figure out the general structure of inference. And that's what we're trying to get from Frege. Like what makes rational inferential thought possible? What is the ground for that? And he realized, or in his early work sort of wrote, that this is in some sense going to be an impossible project, because I am going to have to use the tools of rational inferential thought to go back to the ground level and uncover the structure of those very tools, which is going to presuppose their use. So in order to uncover the structure of rational inferential thought, I'm going to have to use rational inferential thought, which presupposes that rational inferential thought is good.
Yeah.
So at some level, you have to say the whole project is undoable, is unsayable, or mystical, as he put it. So what you kind of do is you show it.
Yeah.
And then you have to kind of say, whenever they point to, well, that's kind of paradoxical, or that would reflect back on itself and create the liar paradox or something like that, you say, yeah, because I can't actually say it.
Yeah, it's like Spigosian's blind entitlement, right?
Right. So it's this paradox of trying to get to the deepest level of thinking itself, because you have to think to get there, which means you presuppose the tools. So you're going to end up with some kind. And so Wittgenstein's response to that is, I can kind of say enough to kind of get the idea in your head, but then when you press me, I have to say it's inexpressible, it's ineffable. Okay? And actually, there's something in the continental tradition that just sort of takes this as, yeah, so the whole Western project is a sham, right? And that was my interest. Sort of my interest is in there's like this weird sort of circularity or potential paradoxical nature, but it strikes me as, and so there's something there in this response of, so the project can't succeed, right? But then the way it went in the continental tradition struck me as very bizarre. It was kind of just a non sequitur to me. It was a little bit like, I'm speaking totally metaphorically here, but it was a little bit like, okay, since we realize the Western rationalist project can't be concluded, obviously it should be illegal to wear brown shoes. It's just like the way they responded to it was sort of like, well, then you should do this, or
when you kill logic,
well, yeah, right. So
anything follows from a contradiction,
right? So for for example, if you take a sort of deconstructionist approach, which is based on sort of inverting things, where you saw general, we see singular, where you saw, particular, we see general, and this kind of stuff. It's like, well, if the project of logic falls away, why would inversion be better than non-inversion, right? Why would, empowerment be better than disempowerment? Why would helping people be better than not helping people? Like, you know what I mean? It all kind of falls apart. So I think that the Western project has to be preserved somehow or another. We have to work our way through those paradoxes and puzzles. And so that was what the project was going to be. But then I became just more interested in the nature of inference itself. So I'm more working on that right now. So I haven't gotten there yet.
Yeah.
But I understand the starting point of a lot of people like Derrida and Foucault and their rejection of this, but where they go with it strikes me as just replacing something else with it that functions pretty much the same way. And so I'm not convinced they went the right way with it, but that was what it was going to be.
On the preservation of the Western tradition, what's the worst part of philosophy as a field today, and what does the field do better than ever has?
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's a really mixed bag, because it's become a profession in the last 100 years, right? It's expanded massively with post Second World War university expansion. And when things get professionalized like that, they become sort of, part of the managerial project of universities, and bureaucratization kicks in, and you get a push of quantity over quality, and you get careerism, and you get things that are sort of antithetical to what, small p philosophy is, in my opinion, right? Which is, the application of the faculty of reason to the puzzles, paradoxes, and mysteries of the human condition, which should be, pursued in all human creativity and rationality that we can muster, not on a schedule of an annual report or something like that. So there's lots of things about the professionalization of the discipline that cause it to go a little bit away from its mission, and also cause it to be disconnected from the sciences, because they're literally in different faculties. Arts and science tend to be divided between the arts and the science, or in some places there literally is a faculty of arts and a faculty of science. And
should they be separate?
I doubt. I mean, in the case of philosophy, I don't really think so, no. Because I still see philosophy as fundamentally a formal discipline, right? It's not empirical, primarily. And so, it has a lot in common with things like math and, and that kind of thing. So it probably belongs a little bit more with the sciences, actually, or at least half.
Do you think specific subdisciplines of philosophy should be split between humanities and, sciences? So, maybe continental, applied ethics, maybe, or more on the humanities side.
Political philosophy.
Yeah, political philosophy, metaphysics, epistemology, logic,
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to know, right? I mean, because I think the significance of philosophy is very tightly bound up in the human condition and human nature. So I can't imagine really doing anything that I would call philosophy without wanting to know, like, nothing about biology, psychology, chemistry, physics, math, like even applied ethics or politics. Right. I mean, surely ethics at some level has to take into account what uniquely human flourishing is, right? I mean, you can't just do it in complete abstraction from what the human being is, I would think. So wouldn't you want to know something about psychology and biology and evolution and these sorts of things? Like, wouldn't that be kind of important to know what's, special or unique about, how societies can function well or not? I have a conception of politics that is personally grounded in my. This goes back to something a little bit about the mystery of consciousness, right? But there's something about the human being as a kind of creative entity, where creativity is tightly bound up with rationality, right? Like, creativity is not just, wild throwing whatever you want at the wall, right? But it's sort of like, that's that mix between control and, just sort of boundless energy in the middle. It's because I think we are sort of unique in that way.
Yeah.
And that we all will express ourselves uniquely. That, I just think that, like, coercive structures are just terrible in general for human beings. I just think this is something about us. And I'd want to know more, as much as I could, about how human beings produce creative ideas, creative thoughts, creative sentences, creative works, in order to really see, right? But that's one of the reasons I err against government authority, right? Because I have a view of humans, that I would want to know how biology talks about us, how psychology talks about us. I wouldn't want to be cut off from it. So I can't imagine any area of philosophy that I'd want completely cut off. And yet, I also don't want to legislate either. So I want to let people sort of pursue what they want to pursue.
You were hinting a little bit there at some of your kind of core beliefs. So I'm actually curious what Mozerskyism really would look like if you were to spell it out. So, like, for example, you said, like, you didn't like coercion. So I would surmise that, for example, you would be against maybe some ban on smoking. But then, I'd want to know, well, we ban other drugs. So, like, what do you think of that? Or, like, what are your duties to others? Like, I'm not sure how much you donate to charity. I keep asking these questions. But is there a unifying set of principles that is going on here that you could call Mozerskyism, that you've kind of developed over the decades, that I could subscribe
in the political
to?
realm? Political, ethical.
I'm almost just interested in your meta ethics and how that informs you. But I just want to dogmatically subscribe to this philosophy.
Well, if I had to sum it up in a sentence, it's not original, but it's I think the best one, which is live and let live. Mm-hmm. That's how I would ultimately summarize the ethical component of it, right? Mm-hmm. The sort of the epistemological personal view of it is what I said before, which is I find that, you know, the logical regimentation of your thought, again, this is very Stoic, right? It just cleans up your inner life a little bit, including the emotional side of it, mm-hmm. right? So I would say, you know, keep your priors away from 0 and 1, mm-hmm. live and let live, and keep wondering about the mind-body problem.
Maybe we can illuminate Mozerskyism a little bit more. So if you were to get $1 billion, what cause would you donate that to? Would you be a little more biased towards like intelligent animals over like
shrimp welfare,
white rhinos over ants, or would you donate to something human, or what would it be?
What would
you could say you'd keep it too.
Yeah, I mean, so I don't
start a university.
I'm not. Yeah, I definitely am. Not only am I logocentric, I'm definitely human-centric for sure in my ethics, right? Mm-hmm. I do not because I think non-human animals are irrelevant or their suffering doesn't matter, but I do think there's a qualitative difference for human suffering because of our ability to abstract and have a self-awareness that extends into the future. In a way, we can conceptualize our death in a way that I think is unique. So I think we can suffer in a way that's unique. So I think there's a qualitative difference. I do. Mm-hmm. But that's a Humerian intuition. That's not an argument. That's just a seeming. That's an epistemological seeming to me, right? Like, I see a qualitative difference in the suffering when you can form thoughts like, you know, what is this going to mean for my children, or something like that, for this if I'm not here for them, or something like that, is a special kind of suffering that goes above and beyond pain, right? Mm-hmm. Pain is a form of suffering, but I think we have a different kind of suffering that we can formulate. So I'm human centric. So look, I'm fairly boring, right? What would my cause be? Who's got the best shot at curing cancer? Mm-hmm. You know, who's got the best shot at solving health problems, at increasing quality of human life, all that kind of stuff. You know, I think that I haven't thought very deeply about this, right? But I do remember that Steven Pinker book, Better Angels of Our Nature, mm-hmm. where he just talks about, he has like 1,000 graphs in that book. It's like, you know, things have just been getting better and better and better all over the world in the last century. Less war, less death from famine, less death from disease. I mean, so in a certain sense, things are working.
Yeah.
We're getting there. We're doing the right stuff, right? So I don't think it's a matter of, so I'm not one of these people who looks at the world and says, you know, oh my God, we better put $1 billion here because of what's going on there, or this or that kind of stuff. And yes, and since I do prioritize elimination of human suffering and the advancement of human flourishing, it would be stuff connected to health and well-being. That's what I would donate to.
If you think about the sociological or psychological correlates of philosophers, when you learn that someone has like a philosophy PhD, what do you think that kind of entails, other than like the obvious? Okay, so like they went to school for a number of years, but specifically for a philosopher. Yeah. So for me at least, I think Xavier and I both agree. Like when we see a philosopher, they're usually gonna take a long time to answer questions. They're gonna have a lot of good. They'll use that kind of interesting language. A second thing I've noticed is that they're much more interested in the arts, specifically literature and classical music. But anyways, those are mine. But what do you think?
You know, that's a good question. And, you know, I honestly have never really formed an opinion on that, actually. I mean, one thing I will say though, right, is that I think there are lots of people I would call philosophers who don't have degrees in philosophy, who have just, you know, thanks to all the avenues of communication we now have now, you know, YouTube, Substack, Twitter, or X, etc. Right? Like, I often read things from people I've never heard of, or they're anonymous. Like, they're philosophers for sure. Like, they're going deep into these issues, and so there. I don't know what the answer to that question is, other than I think there's going to be a certain amount of biasing towards not only philosophically oriented people, but philosophically oriented people who are also well cut out to go through a PhD program, which might be a different kind of thing, right? But for me, like I guess personally I felt that I fit in very intellectually with philosophers, but I have a very different sort of set of tastes. Like I mean, I love classical music, but I love a lot more. It's not the highest level of music for me.
You played music for 2 years after you graduated from your BA. Yeah. Could you please tell us about that? That sounds so interesting.
Yeah. Well, it was I mean, I played in bands in high school as well, or a band in high school as well. So that was the 80s. And so in the 80s, we were a kind of synth pop / rock band. Right, so if you just think of 80s bands. That's who we were modeling ourselves on. So like Simple Minds, Duran Duran, In Excess. You know, think of bands like that. That was our style. Then went to university. Was out of school for a couple years, just aimless and working and playing music. And we got back together. And this was now the 90s. So, you know, grunge was in the air. So we became kind of a punk grunge band. And you know, played, you know, we were in Toronto at this point. We started in Ottawa. We were all in Toronto at this point, and we're playing around, just, you know, doing the classic Wednesday night at a club with 7 people in the audience and wondering whether we would ever make it or not. And, you know, in retrospect, had a lot of fun. Enjoyed it. While I was in it, of course, there was a lot of anxiety because, you know, you're wondering, you know, should I keep doing this? Is it going to be a waste of my time? Could I do this for 10 years and just be nowhere? You know, so there's a lot of, I remember while I was pursuing it, feeling a lot of worry about the future. But when I look back at it, I'm glad we did it. It was fun. And we did a couple of shows with some really good bands and had a fun time doing it. And you know, we do have some songs on Spotify. You can listen.
Ooh, what's the band?
It's called Odessa Steps.
Odessa Steps.
Interesting. Yeah. What instrument did you play?
I was the guitarist and vocalist.
Wow, really?
So you'll be hearing me if you go to that Spotify page.
Beautiful thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's largely sort of punk inspired grunge with a little bit of the 80s. I guess survived into it.
Do you still currently play music? And if so, what's your favorite genre to play compared to your favorite genre to listen to?
Yeah. I don't really like play, but I still compose and record.
Yeah.
So
Scarlet to it.
And what do I like to do? Is what my sound now is a kind of, it tends to be a little more to the 80s dark wave roots. That tends to be what I have. It's a more mellow, slower stuff. But honestly, you know, what you can do with a simple laptop now is I explore everything.
Yeah.
So but what I loved to play was for sure the heavy stuff, the punk, the metal, the grunge, and loved doing that.
Yeah.
That was just total catharsis. And you know, so for me, the musical performance was very much a kind of just getting the energy out of the system, and I loved doing that. But when it comes to I listen to everything, but I still very much enjoy the heavy stuff. there's really no such thing as too heavy for me. Like whatever heavy band you can think of, I'm like, I've probably, like, I can fall asleep to it.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
wow, interesting.
Like I used to just fall asleep
It's
to
metal to the core.
To some of the great metal bands. So, but when it comes to like listening in general, like anything that's good, like I have no genre.
Yeah.
I like electronic, I like metal, I like rock, I like country, I like jazz. If it's a good song, I'll listen to it.
Who's your jazz goat?
None. I just know that sometimes I listen, and I'm like, oh, that's really great. So there was a, there was a, when I was one, I'll tell you. So one night I was just, I was still a musician, I was walking with a couple friends. Just again, it was a Tuesday night in Toronto, and we heard this band, the music coming out of a club on Yonge Street. So we go in and there's nobody in there except the opening act is in the audience. Well, the opening act is up and the main band is in the audience, and then they switched. And there was me and my two friends, right? And the band was this band that had a little bit of success in the 90s, this Toronto band. They were called Glue Leg. And then they, I was always wondered what happened to them. They came back together and they released an album, I think, last year. And it's a very different kind of album. It's very jazzy. It's got a lot of, so I'm just listening to it. I'm just loving that album, right? For example. And I'm just like, I know nothing about jazz, but this is great.
Yeah, that's cool.
And that's my general approach to music. So, it can be a country song. It can be a metal song. It can be, I discover a lot of, I'm kept in the current music scene. I'd be completely clueless if it weren't for my daughter. And she just keeps me plugged in. So we go to concerts.
What does she listen to?
She's very eclectic as well, and I'm very proud. She's also getting into the heavy metal stuff. But for example, we just went to the Neighborhood concert in Toronto.
Yeah,
and I was blown away by that. Okay, I knew a little bit about the Neighborhood, obviously, but I could not believe how good they were. Wow. Just unbelievably good. So and they were interesting too, because when I listened to them on the recordings, right, in studio, they have a very produced electronic, almost hip hop, a lot of drum machines. Their live show was rock. Mm-hmm. Live drummer just banging on those drums like John Bonham from Led Zeppelin, or just like smashing the drums. Guitars, bass, drums, and a keyboardist and the singer. It was just like powerful, good old fashioned rock show. Blew me away, actually. I was just like impressed by these guys. So yeah, like I'll listen to anything, but when I'm in the studio myself, which is, my computer, not a nice space like this, it tends to be kind of that sort of moody synthy, dark wavy kind of stuff.
Are you an Ableton or Logic guy?
Logic / GarageBand even still. I can do a lot with GarageBand.
Okay, what's your this is the last question from me. What's your preferred answer to the Fermi paradox?
Probably that most civilizations discover virtual reality before they conquer interstellar travel. So in other words, rather than bothering to go out on a 1,000-year trip to another planet, they just put their goggles on and do it simulation, and so they don't even bother. They lose their desire to explore.
So
that's probably my favorite answer.
A few months back, I was thinking about the UFOs, and I did my own probability distribution for them.
Okay.
I put it as 95% information asymmetries between different departments of the U.S. government. So like Space Force, Air Force, and then I think the last 5% was basically an error term. But it was like 3% foreign power. And then I put 1% each to time travelers and aliens. Mm-hmm. Do you have something similar to that, or would it be radically different for what you think of UFOs?
Well, don't you have a factor in there for just flat out deception, like people just filming in low resolution and then trying to pass it off as UFOs?
I don't know though. There's so much military evidence now that's coming out in the past few years.
I guess so. I mean, I suspect that so this is without a whole lot of information. I haven't dug into this, right? But my prior would be a lot of it is hoaxing and just error that like honest errors, like innocent things, like I was just reading a report about this one. I'm going to probably mangle this one a little bit, but this was the one where some Air Force pilot was filming along the water at night, and there was this thing that was moving in a weird way. And it turns out, apparently, I don't know this, but the story was that was actually a camera that was sensitive in the infrared, and that was the glare from another jet that was invisible, but that was the glare on the water in the infrared range. But the camera had some kind of gyroscope in it or something so that it would adjust to keep the horizon consistent in the picture even as that thing moved. And that made it look like it was moving in these impossible ways, but it was actually the camera adjustment. So I put a pretty high probability on that kind of error, like misreading or miscalibrating or something like that. I put a decent amount of probability on just people looking to get some hoax media attention. I think your miscommunication one is one I hadn't thought of, but it makes a lot of sense. Like I have partial information, I fill it in. Another person has the other half, they fill it in differently, and it looks like some kind of cover up or something like that.
Your first answer is interesting. Yeah. I guess maybe my response to it, I was just thinking while you were answering, if the universe is really big, like infinite questions aside, but it's obviously very giant, right?
Yeah.
There's still so many people like Elon Musk that I just know they don't care if they could do it simulated. Like they're just gonna do it anyway. Especially if it's pretty inexpensive. Just like post.
Would you step into the space colonization experience machine?
This is like post, super intelligent AI, so they could easily travel the stars. And the universe is so big that again, it just gets me back to the Fermi paradox. Like, I mean, it's not a bad answer, but it just seems still so improbable.
Yeah, I mean, again, there could be other answers, but that's the one that I find the most. I mean, there's two that I find plausible, like just a kind of logical level or whatever you want to say, scientific, right? One is just that what I said, right, which is that that computer technology develops faster than material technology. So it's just faster to have literally completely like simulation that is equivalent to a base reality. So just explore that way, and people will be like, yeah, I don't have to worry about getting blown up in a rocket or having to die in space because it takes 1,000 years to get there, right? And the other one, the other one that strikes me as just kind of interesting is that maybe the conditions for the origin of life are just way less likely than we think. Like maybe it's not trillions to one, but like 10 to the 100 to 1 that life would ever form. Like maybe that was just so fluky that there just actually aren't that many in any, like let's say the universe is indefinitely large. Any sort of 100 million light year volume would just only have one or two most likely, even if I don't know. But my favorite is still the people decide, like the Elon Musk gets us to Mars, let's say. But then, how many in the next generation are going to have his energy and his work ethic and his intelligence? Maybe people will just say, we'll just stay here on Mars with our VR headsets.
All you need is one.
Yeah, maybe. But that would be the answer I'd pick if I had to right now, because I agree. It's an interesting paradox.
So you lived in Toronto and New York.
I lived in New York for a year.
All right.
New York City for a year, New York State for another year, upstate New York for a separate
Which city's better?
Toronto or New York?
Yeah.
Oh man, I don't know. It's really hard to compare those cities. I mean, New York is so unique. It is like stepping into a movie in certain ways, right? Like, but I mean, we are talking the 90s, so I have no idea if it's still this way, right? But it's such an iconic place. Empire State Building, all these beautiful. It was a fantastic experience, no question about that. Toronto's just so different.
Yeah.
But it's so I don't really see Toronto as really having a conception of itself as competing with New York. Toronto sees itself, I think, as Canada's #1 city.
Yeah.
Not trying to compete with the American one. So I don't know. I mean, Toronto, obviously, I lived there for a long time, so I view it, it's more of a home to me. But so, and it's a great city, and I still visit there, and I think it's a great place. It's I can't really see how to compare them. New York is like stepping into some kind of postcard, though, right?
Fair enough.
It's seen it in every movie.
Do you think there's a difference between Canadian and American philosophers in general due to the cultures of the countries?
Yeah, that's a good question. I suspect I'm not in a very good position to answer it. I would guess that the American philosophical scene would have had much more of an impact from pragmatism because of, Peirce, James, and Dewey. And I suspect that they would have been a little less influential north of the border in the 19th and early 20th centuries. So I would gather that guess there's probably a difference there. But if I try to think about the very prominent Canadian philosophers, certainly of the recent decades, like Charles Taylor or Ian Hacking or John Leslie, who is an underappreciated Guelph philosopher, gave us the Doomsday Argument. It's a very eclectic mix, actually. Will Kymlicka here at Queen's obviously had a huge impact.
Joe Heath.
Yeah. It's a very high quality in Canada, and part of the reason it's hard to know is because like everything, we don't get the attention of the American ones. But I think the per capita we hit just as hard. But I see a lot of eclecticism in the Canadian scene, like Canadian philosophers, even individually, right? Like I knew Ian Hacking as a student, so I had a chance to talk. I mean, his mind went everywhere, right? It was just like he knew so much about so many things, and another Canadian philosopher who works in the States named Calvin Normore, who I got to know, same kind of thing, just sort of thought about everything. And so I kind of sense a certain, maybe an eclecticism in the Canadian philosopher that's little, that if you want to put it the other way, maybe they have a greater focus. Someone like Daniel Dennett sort of can grind away at something and just master every element of it, but say not have much to say about history of philosophy or ethics or something like that. Yeah. I don't know, but I suspect I suspect there's not much difference over the differences are disappearing, if anything. But maybe originally there was a sort of focus around pragmatism in one case and a more eclectic, less populated, more spread out country on the other hand.
Yeah.
I don't know.
So given technology and how AI is rapidly changing the world, do you think it's still worth doing a PhD in philosophy today? If so, what should young philosophers be focusing on, and is there any advice you'd give to them?
There are opportunities now to both learn and make a mark in philosophy that I think it is now the case that there are realistic paths to being a philosopher without the degree and without an academic affiliation. It is possible to do that. And so I think a really talented, really motivated person who just wants to be self-taught, an autodidact, can do it.
Yeah.
And can make a mark and can become a very successful philosopher. Although, the thing about that is, right, everybody wants to become, a famous YouTuber or podcaster or something like that. So it's a tough road. I don't think it's an easy one to go, but I think there are opportunities that never existed before. I think the person who should get the PhD at the end of the day is the person who says, if this is my last thing I ever do in philosophy, I'll be glad I did it. In other words, I'll look back at the next 5 years, and even if I go and get a law degree or start my YouTube channel, then I'll be glad I did this. I just like reading this stuff, researching this stuff, going to conferences, talking to my professors about it, like if it's the kind of thing where you say, yeah, like this is just my element, right? Then I think you should do it. That's fine. Well, I shouldn't say should do it. I think it's a good choice for you if you're that kind of person. Because, there are still opportunities there to become an academic in the more traditional sense, although, it's never, I don't know that the market's ever been this bad. I'm not sure. I'm not as connected to it, right? But for some people, I think that, like even in my day, you might apply for a job and there'd be 500 applicants for one job, right? But there's 5 million people vying for the number one podcaster or whatever, right? So like it's a tough road either way. So I would say if you just love it, just love it, and you like the formal education, you should do it. I mean, that's my answer to all philosophy. If you like it, do it. But the opportunity to carve out your own path is there, right? But I think there's right, the one that I can think of who I know is made quite a mark for himself, right? Alex O'Connor. But he has a degree as far as I know, right? Didn't he do his PhD at Oxford or something like that? And then
I'm not sure. I think
he has a BPhil.
Do you know Eliezer Yudkowsky?
Yeah.
Yeah, he doesn't have any. He's like an example of someone. I don't think he has. I think he finished high school, but he doesn't have any university.
Yeah. I mean, but you got to be careful, right? There are exceptional people. There are exceptional people who can, go to such high levels by being self-taught. If Alex O'Connor just has a BPhil, but, BPhil, that used to be what you would get. That would be your teaching degree at that point, right? I think the British system still it's pretty advanced still, but either way, I think it depends a lot on the person, right? I think if you have a talent for it, you can make a mark without it. But if you love doing it, you like actually taking classes and being in seminars and arguing it on, colloquia and all that kind of stuff. And you'd say, yeah, I'll do this for 4 years. And then even if it doesn't work out, I'd be happy I did it. Then I think that's a good choice for you. Yeah. But you guys have options that we didn't have. There's no question about that.
Yeah.
There's no question.
Well, it remains to be seen what Xavier and I get up to, but thank you so much.
It's been
Professor
a pleasure.
Mozersky.
Thank you for the questions, guys. I appreciated it. And I appreciated them and enjoyed this time greatly.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay.
Oh, my goodness.